Hi guys, in this tutorial we're going to learn how to create 3D worlds within Photoshop. Now this is entirely inspired by Benny Productions, who is a fantastic Photoshop YouTuber, and if you haven't checked him out yet, make sure you check him out. But here's how to create his idea of these fantastic 3D worlds. So without further ado, let's get started. This photo that we've got here is going to act as the top base of our image. So I'm just going to scale it down slightly. And then what I'm going to do is going to go over to our layers tab here and reduce the opacity of our top layer to about 80 to 75%, anywhere the way you can basically see through the image and see the grid that we've got behind our photo. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to reposition our photo, making sure that all four corners are covered by the original image. So you can see here, we want to try and make sure that all of these kind of nice 3D features are included in our top square. So we can just reposition this until we're happy. And I'm pretty happy with this. So now what we can do is we can bring the opacity back up to 100%, select our top layer and add a layer mask. So you want to make sure that you've got the white layer mask selected here and then press B to activate the brush tool. You'll see on the left hand side that the brush tool is now activated. You want to make sure the opacity is on 100% and your flow is also on 100%. Make sure you have black selected as your foreground color. Right now we have it as white. And if you press X on the keyboard, you'll be able to flip that around. So now we've got black selected as our foreground color. You'll see that when you start painting now, you're actually removing areas of the mask. So with that being said, what we're going to do is we're just going to start removing the mask around our area here, making sure that we remove the unwanted areas. And now we can actually reduce the opacity back down. And we can just start to remove anything that's not on top of this top square. If you do end up removing any areas, you can just press X to get white back as your foreground color. And when you paint with white, it's going to add things back to your layer mask. And when you switch it back to black, it's going to start removing things. Amazing. So once you've kind of done a rough outline on top of your surface of your image, you can now start to do the very small intricate details like removing the areas around the trees. And in order to do this, you can basically just use a very, very small brush and you can just start to erase around the tree. And you really need to take your time on this one to give you the most accurate effect. But you can basically just use a very small brush and just start to paint around your subject. Fantastic. So there's just this tiny bit left on this left-hand side here. So I'm just going to remove the water from around this tree that's outside of our grid here. And now you should be pretty much done. So you can go ahead and bring the opacity back up to 100%. And this is what you are left with. So here is a fantastic start. You've got the top base of your structure completely done. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add on some rock surfaces onto the edges of our left and our right side. And we're going to add some lighting onto those to make it look more realistic. So let's go ahead and start doing that. So we can start by dragging in a kind of a rocky texture, whatever rock texture that you fancy. And you can just downscale it and reposition it. And I like to align it up with our first line here. So once you've got it aligned, just roughly, press Ctrl-T, right-click, and we can go ahead and click on Distort. Now you can just line up these layers here, line up the corners so that they match, like so. So now you've got a rock wall completed on the left-hand side. We're going to duplicate this layer and flip it and rotate it to the right-hand side. So if you press Ctrl-J, you'll duplicate your layer. Now press Ctrl-T to make a selection, right-click, and flip it horizontally. Now you can just reline it up, and then right-click, distort, and do the exact same thing. Line up the corners with each corner. Fantastic stuff. So in order to make this realistic, we can see that we've actually got light coming from the right-hand side here. So with the light coming from this direction, this area would actually be more shaded than this area. This area would have the light shining upon it, and this area would be in the shade. As you can see here, we kind of got some existing shadows already here. So let's add that realism to our photo. So we can select this left rock texture, go to the bottom of our page to add some adjustments, and we can add an exposure layer. Hold Alt on your keyboard and click below, and this will clip it to the level below, basically meaning that any changes that we make to our adjustments is only going to affect this layer. So if we drag our exposure down here, we can see that it's actually making this rock face darker. And around here is probably pretty accurate for me. I'm happy with this. So now we've got a lighter side on the right hand side and a darker side on the left. Fantastic. What we're going to do is we're just going to actually select all of these layers here, and we're going to press Ctrl G. This will group it all into one group, and now we can rename this group Rocks. We can also group this one, and we can name this Top Level, just to be organized. So now we've got everything all labeled all together. What we're going to do now is we're going to add in the water. So in top of this, we're actually going to start to add in our water. But first of all, we can actually create a layer mask with the rocks here and just press Ctrl I to invert it. So we've removed the rocks now, but it's still there. We're going to paint it on a little bit later. So we can go ahead and now select our top level layer. Now, after you've done that, you can select the pen tool on the left-hand side here. And at the top, you'll see that you've got a few options. You've got shape, which we want to have selected, and the fill option. So the fill option is basically dictating what the color of our shape is going to be. So for us, we want a nice watercolor. So we can go ahead and select this. And if we just click somewhere, it's going to take a color sample from our top layer. And we can see here we get this nice color. I'm actually going to take a slightly darker version of that color and just hit OK. Now, with the stroke, if you have this option selected, it's going to make sure that there's no stroke around the edge of our shape, making sure that it's just a solid color. So, once you've got all those settings sorted, you can now just go ahead and zoom in to your project here, pick the first corner, pick the second corner, third corner, and fourth corner. And now you'll see that we've actually just made a nice water shape on top of our layer here. So we can add some shadows to this to give it some more realism. So if we go to our adjustments again and add an exposure layer, you'll see that we can clip it below by holding Alt. We can now drag this exposure down just ever so slightly. Press Ctrl I on our keyboard to invert it. Now we can press B to activate the brush tool. And now with our brush, we can change the flow to about 20%. Anywhere around 20% will be fine. And then with a soft brush, with white selected as your foreground color, you can now start to just paint on top here, and you'll see that it starts to become slightly darker. If you press X, you can just paint around to remove any areas. There we go. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take an even softer flow. So we're going to take a flow of about 5%. And then with white selected as our foreground color, we're just going to start to paint underneath it. And what this has done is it's basically provided this soft gradient effect on top of our water here, which is going to help massively when it comes to blending this all in to make it look more 3D. Now we need to do the exact same thing on the other side. So we can go ahead and duplicate our shape layer here. Now with this shape layer, we can go ahead and press Ctrl T, right click, and we can just flip this one again horizontally. We can line it up, right click, and distort, and line it up nicely. Okay, now we've aligned this side, we can go ahead and add an exposure layer again, clip it to the level below, drag our exposure down slightly, and we're just going to make the same changes that we did on the other side. So with the brush tool, we can go ahead and change our flow to about 20% again. Let's make it bang on 20. Nice one. I'm pretty happy with this. So what we can do now is we can go ahead and select all of these layers and press Ctrl G to put them into a group, and we can label this water. So within our water layer here, we want to make this left side darker than our right side, again, because this side is going to be the shaded area. So let's see, this is our bottom left side. So I'm going to select both of the layers that are affecting this left side and press Ctrl G again. And this can be our left. And then I'm going to group the other ones. And this is our right. So all I've done inside of this water group that we've got here, we've got the left-hand side, which is this one, and we've got the right-hand side, which is this one. So inside the left, we can go ahead and add an adjustment layer to this group. So we can add an exposure layer, And we can just bring the exposure down and clip it below. And that's just going to make this side ever so slightly darker. Like so. Now with the right hand side, we're going to go ahead and add another exposure layer, clip it below, and drag this side up a little bit. Fantastic. Alright, so that's our water sorted. We've got our water layers now. We need to bring back this rock. So, with the rock layer, we can select this black layer mask that we've created here. And we're going to make sure that we have a solid hardness brush. So you can see here, we've got hardness 100%, opacity 100%, and I'm going to have the flow all the way back up to 100. Now, this is super important because we want the rock to look solid. We need it to look realistic. If it's got soft edges, it won't look real. So, in order to paint this back on, we need to make sure that we have white selected as our foreground color. And now, when we start to paint, you actually just bring back the rock that we originally created. Alright, and we can just start to paint this on underneath the water layer here. And you can just paint on a rough kind of look. Doesn't really matter at this point. We can make any changes we like with this layer mask. I'm going to bring this back up like this. I like it going down a little bit, up and down. Nice. And this is all connected up. And then we can press X. And that will give us a black foreground. And then we can just drop it back down. Nice. Now you can see we've added the rock back into our photo here. So now we need to add some coral into our photo, and the coral is going to provide some depth underneath the water. So let's do that, and let's try and make it look realistic. So without further ado, we can go ahead in and just drag our coral layer into our project here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure it's underneath our rock layers here. So we've got the reef. We can now press Ctrl T, right click, and you guessed it, we're going to distort it once again to match up to these lines. Cool. Now, once you've matched it up just roughly, it doesn't have to be that accurate. We're just going to make it a little bit bigger. So we're just going to expand it, and we can add a layer mask now. Now, with the layer mask, we can go ahead and choose the gradient tool, go into basics, and just choose a black to white gradient here. And now, when you basically use this gradient, what it's going to do is it's just going to slowly fade it in and fade it out. So now pressing with B activated on our layer mask, we can use a black brush and just paint around the areas that aren't needed in the photo. Alright, and you can see that we've got all of this coral nicely on the edge here. You can just, if you wanted to, start to paint and fade it out. And you can even have a super low flow for this one. And just bringing areas in and out of focus. Just fading them out. Now, in order to blend this together, we need to add a color balance layer. And the color balance layer basically allows you to make changes to your color changes, just very quick color changes to your photo. So we're going to clip it below by holding Alt and selecting below. And then now you'll see that when we make these changes, it's just going to provide a very subtle color change to our photo. So we want to try and match the color to the rest of the water. Some greens, maybe some magentas, bit of cyan, bit less blue. Perfect. And a really cool tip that I found with this is if you add an exposure layer, clip it below, and you drag up the offset just a tiny bit, you'll see that it adds this kind of white haze to the image. And if you press Ctrl I, you can just paint this haze with a 20% flow. Paint this haze on into the background. And you'll see super subtle, but it helps just fade it out nicely. Okay, now that we've done that, I actually want to make a few more changes to this coral. So I'm going to make a nice soft brush with a low flow And I'm just going to start to paint around the edge. And I think that kind of fades it out a little bit more. All right, now I'm happy with that. We can do the exact same thing on the other side here to provide a bit of realism. So let's get right into it. Fantastic. So now that's done, I'm pretty happy with this. It's kind of coming together really nicely. We need to kind of make this rock look a little bit more realistic. So with all of our reefs, we can go ahead and select all these layers, group them together, and just label them reef, coral, whatever you like. All right, so there's our reef layers added, and I can see here that there is a mistake, which is why I do these things. So there you have it. Now we've got everything sorted, and I've put that into a group. So we've now got our reefs, we've got our water, and we've got our top level, and we've got the rocks. All right, so it's all coming together really nicely. So now to add a little bit more color to our photo, we need to blend in these rocks. So in order to do that, we can go ahead and add an exposure layer, clip it to these rocks, and we need to add in a little bit of light. Now what this light is going to do is if we invert this mask with Control I, we're basically just going to paint around the edges on a very low flow again with a super hard brush. I'm just going to paint around the edges of with a white brush selected. So now with this exposure layer, we can go ahead and go down to the effects and go to blending options, and it will open up this menu here. Now with this menu, if you hold Alt and click on this and drag it down, it's basically just going to blend it into the blacks, making it a little less harsh. So you can see here, this is the effect that it's having. So when we slide it up and down, it's just going to blend it in a little bit more, giving us a bit more realism with our light. So if we hold Alt, click and drag, it's going to blend it in a bit more. Fantastic. So now what we've done is we've basically just added a white layer on top around the edges where the water and the rock meet, kind of giving it a bit more distinction. So what we can do now to add this to this box effect that we've got, this nice little cube effect, we can add in a new layer here. Press B to activate the brush tool. And with a white, very small, hard brush, with a flow of 100%, we can just draw all the way across like so. And if you hold shift while clicking, you can actually draw straight lines. So to achieve straight lines, you click once and then hold shift and draw your next point. And now we can change the blending mode of this to basically just fit in with the environment. Something like this is quite nice. Soft light works really well. Reduce the opacity of this until it just blends in a little nicer. Something like that is really cool. Now you can add a layer mask to this. Press B to activate the brush tool. Increase the size of our brush, make it nice and soft. Reduce the flow. And you can now, with a black brush, just paint, kind of just draw around the edge, and it just takes the harshness out of the lines. But you can see here, super subtly, we've added in a nice little glow around the edges. Okay, so for this left side here, there would actually be, it would be slightly different. So to kind of give it this box effect, we can also improve it by adding in a brand new layer here. And we can go ahead and use the pen tool. And I'm going to take the same watercolor that we used before. And I'm just going to create a little, kind of little shape here. And with the shape, let's make it slightly lighter. So let's copy this color perhaps. Now we can change the blending mode of this. Be like an overlay, for example. And then we can create a layer mask. Use the gradient tool. And just fade it out. And that's helped to give us this nice, well, basically just adds to our little boxy effect. So now we've got all of these corners kind of added up, we can now add some elements to the top of our photo. So if we wanted to add in a sailboat, for example, to the top of our photo, then we can just take an existing image of a sailboat and plop it on top. So for example, with this one, I can take this sailboat and I'm just going to mask a selection around the outside of the sailboat and then remove the background. So there you have it. With the pen tool, I've just made a rough selection around our surface here, and then we can go ahead and press the selection button, hit OK, and create a layer mask. Now with this sailboat, I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller here to match the perspective of our original photo. Change the angle a little bit. And then we have it. We can plop something like this in here, and with the layer mask that we've got, we can basically, with a hard brush, just paint around the edges here to remove anything else from the background that we don't want in our photo. So there you have it. We've now added in this nice sailboat into the environment. So if we wanted to blend this image into the background of our environment, then we need to match the color and the light. So here's how to do it. So if you select your sailboat here, you can go to filter at the top of the page and open up the neural filters. The neural filters is full of a bunch of AI features that are fantastic to help matching the color and the light to your photos. So under this option here, we can go ahead and find the original photo, which is our background. So if I select this one here, you can see it says processing on device, change the strength to 100 and hit OK. It's now made a subtle change, as you can see here, to the lighting and the coloring of our photo. So with our sailboat, we need to add a reflection to it to make it look more realistic, as there would be a nice subtle reflection on the water. So to do that, we can duplicate this layer, press Ctrl T, and then right click and flip it vertically. Now we can just reposition it so it's at the bottom here. Now once you've flipped your sailboat, you can right click on the sailboat layer that we flipped, and we can convert this into a smart object. Add in a layer mask, and then if we select our gradient tool, you can now just start from the bottom and draw up, and you'll slowly fade it out, giving you a nice subtle reflection. And then you can go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and just throw on like a subtle, maybe 2.5 blur, and you can see that we get this nice reflection effect. So now you've added in an element into your photo. The last thing to do would potentially be to add some flying birds into the background, for example. So there we have it, ladies and gents. We've now made a 3D model of a piece of land, all within Photoshop, and you've learned a bunch of skills in the process. So for example, you've learned how to add reflections, you learned how to add lighting, you learned how to add shadows, you've learned how to add color balance layers. You've also learned how to use the gradient tool to blend layers in and out. So there's a bunch of really cool features that you've learned in this tutorial. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and hopefully this inspires you to come up with some of your own awesome creations. I'd love to see them, so please do tag me on Instagram and anything that you make at @RawKeith on Instagram. I would love to see it. Take care.